Hi everyone, it's Miss Costa here, and in this video we're going to go through paper 2 for the November 2022 Edexcel exam series. Okay, so in this question I have been given a scatter graph and I'm asked to find the coordinates of the outlier. Okay, so an outlier is literally just a piece of data that sits far away from the rest of the trend of the general data. So if we look at the scatter graph, we can see that generally it's got a negative correlation. So the point that sits far away from something that fits this trend would be this coordinate here. And to read the coordinate, we always go along the corridor. So I go along the corridor to 2, up the stairs to 1. So the coordinate would be 2, 1. Now the next question says, ignoring the outlier, describe the relationship between the amount of rainfall and the number of hours of sunshine. So the amount of rainfall is the x-axis and the number of hours of sunshine is my y-axis. So let's just look at what's happening and have an example. So when there are 6 millimeters of rainfall, there's only 1 hour of sunshine. And similarly, when there is 1 millimeter of rainfall, there's about 9.5 hours of sunshine. So as the amount of rainfall increases, you can see that the number of hours of sunshine decreases. So this is generally what we call negative correlation. But the question is asking you, it's not just asking you for what type of correlation is there, it's asking you to describe the relationship. So we need to do this in words and we need to use the context of the question. Now, the next question is saying, on the same day in another English town, there were 7 hours of sunshine, and using the scatter graph, estimate the amount of rainfall in this town on this day. Now, it's really important to read this carefully. So when you are estimating from a scatter graph, you don't just pluck a random coordinate out of thin air. You have to draw a line of best fit, okay? Now, I've already drawn one over here. A line of best fit essentially means draw a line going through as many of the coordinates as possible, and roughly the same amount will be above the line as below the line. So once you've drawn your line of best fit, I'd go to where it says 7 hours of sunshine. So 7 hours of sunshine. I go across to the line and then I go down. Okay, so that would be roughly 3.8. Now, you've obviously gonna have done this on the paper with a ruler, so you might get a slightly different answer, but anything in between 3 to 4 will be absolutely fine because it's all based on your individual line of best fit. So next question is an elevations question. So all elevations means is you have like a solid object. This is quite big to see, but if you think about it, what does it look like from one side? What does it look like from above? What does it look like from another side? So picture your 3D object and then think about what would happen if you rotated it and what it would look like. So I'm told that the front elevation and the plan is like the aerial view. So if you imagined you're like in an aeroplane looking straight down, that's what the plan means. So the front elevation and the plan are shown on the grid, and I need to draw the side elevation of the solid from the direction of the arrow. So I'm looking at it from the front, and the plan essentially is going to tell me what it looks like from above. So in terms of what it's going to look like, I know that the height of it must be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know that if I then rotated it to look at the plan, so if this was the back of the shape, I know that it's 3 squares wide. And so I can just fill this in like that. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like from the side, but there's different levels to the shape. So over here, I know there's the first level, 1 square up, so I'll just draw a line there. And then I know there's going to be another level over here, and that's 3 squares up. So I draw another line there. So you'll just kind of have to visualize what it would look like. It would look like essentially some steps, but when you look at steps from face on, you don't necessarily see the steps, they just appear as like little lines. If you can try and picture that with maybe a staircase at home. So that's how I do this question. So in this question, I am told the first 5 terms of an arithmetic sequence. An arithmetic sequence just means each term increases by a constant value. So let's have a look at what's happening. It's always helpful to just write it out again yourself so that you can just do some fun stuff. So what we do when we're looking for, and the question is asking you to find the nth term of the sequence, which just means the rule that allows me to find any term. So the first step is I look for what is happening between each term. So how do I get from 7 to 13? I add on 6. Is that the same case for the next term? 13 to 19? Yep, 19 to 25 and 25 to 31. So I know that each time I go to a next term, I'm adding 6. Therefore, this sequence goes up in the 6 times tables. So whatever your constant difference is, that's what you're going to put as your coefficient of n. So I know it's going up in the 6 times tables, but if it was the actual 6 times tables, it would look like this. Okay, so what's different between the actual 6 times tables, which would be 6n, and this sequence? Well, each term is 1 more than the 6 times tables. So I just write 6n plus 1. To double check if you've got it right, let's see, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th term. Okay, so n represents the position of the term in the sequence. So the 5th term, n would be 5. 6 times 5 is 30. 30 plus 1 is 31, which is the value of the 5th term. So I know that I've got it right. So okay, so in the next part of the question, I am being told that the nth term of a different sequence is 8 take 6n. And I'm being asked to whether negative 58 is a term in this sequence. In order to find out if a term is part of a sequence, what we do is we make the nth term equal to that value. And then we try and solve it to find a value for n. So this is a slightly tricky one because it's got negatives involved. In order to solve an equation, you generally, well, it's just a lot easier if you make your variable positive. So if we just start by adding 6n to both sides, then you'd be left with 8 equals 58 plus 6n, and then n is positive, and that makes life a lot easier. That's negative 58. Then I can move the negative 58 to the other side by adding. So 58 plus 8 is 66. So 66 is 6n. And then I can divide both sides by 6. 66 divided by 6 is 11. So 11 equals n. Now, if n is a whole number, then it is a term in the sequence. It tells me that negative 58 is the 11th term in this sequence. If when you solved it and you found that n was, let's say, 11.2, then it isn't a term in the sequence because you don't have an 11.2th term. Okay, terms in a sequence are always going to be integers, whole numbers. So in this question, I'm told that this diagram shows a plan of Jason's garden. And I know that A, B, C, O, and D, E, F, O, so these over here are rectangles. Then I am told that AFO is a sector of a circle with center O and angle AOF 90 degrees. So I know this is a 90-degree angle. I know that angles in a circle sum to 360. So if it's a 90-degree angle, that must mean it's a quarter of a full circle. And then AFO, yeah, we've done that. And then I've just got the triangle as well. So I'm being told that Jason is going to cover his garden with grass seed. So this whole shape here needs to be covered with grass seed. Each bag of grass seeds covers 14 meters squared of garden, and it costs £10.95. I need to work out how much it will cost Jason to buy all the bags of grass seed he needs. So in order to do this, the first thing I need to do is work out the area of the whole garden. Okay, so first part, is just going to be the rectangles. So the area of a rectangle is base times height. So for here, that would be 77 meters squared. 9 times 7 is 63. So this would be 63 centimeters squared. Then for the circle, how do you work out the area of a circle? The formula is pi r squared, where r is the length of the radius. And because it's a quarter of a circle, you're going to have to divide by 4. So what's the radius of this? Well, I know that this length here is 7, therefore this length here must also be 7. So I'm going to do pi times by 7 squared and then divide that by 4. So that would be 49 pi over 4. And I can just type that into my calculator. So 49 pi times by, divided by 4 gives me 38.48. So this would be 38.48451001. I can deal with rounding later. And the last part I need to do is the area of this triangle here. So once again, I'm going to have to use the other measurements that I've been given. I know that this length is 9, so this will also be 9. And I know that this length is 11, so this will be 11. What's the area of a triangle? Similar to a rectangle, but a triangle is essentially like half a rectangle. So what am I going to do? Area of triangle is base times height divided by 2. So I'm going to do 9 times by 11 divided by 2, which is 99 over 2. So once again, I've got my area, and that would just be 49.5 meters squared. So what I want to do is work out the total area of the garden. So the total area of the garden, I'm going to add all my individual areas up. So total area is 77 plus 63 plus 49.5 plus 38.484. Or I could have just left that as 49 pi over 4. So let's add all that together. 63 plus 77 plus 38.48451001. And that gives me 227.98451. So that is the total area of the garden. Now I know each bag of grass seed covers 14 meters squared. So what I want to do is figure out how many, and I'm going to just divide it. So keep your answer on your calculator and then you can just divide. So I'm going to divide that by 14, which tells me I'm going to need 16.284 bags of grass seed. Now, when I go to a shop, it would be very nice if I could be like, oh, hey there, could I just have 0.28 of a pack? Because I'm not actually going to use all of it. So can I just pay for what I'm going to use? But that's not how life works. If you go and you buy a bag of grass seeds, you have to buy the whole bag. So because it's real life, we're going to need to round this up to 17. Obviously, if we were just rounding numerically, 16.2 would round down to 16. But in real life, you need to use everything. So I'm going to need to buy 17 bags of grass seed. And I'm told that each bag costs £10.95. So 17 times by £10.95 gives me a cost of £186.15. Okay, so that's how I do that. So you just break up the question, work out the area of each individual little part, divide it by 14 to figure out how many grass seeds needed, and multiply it by 10.95. Okay, so here I've been given a triangle. It's a right angle triangle. I know that because it's got a 90-degree angle, and I'm being asked to work out the value of x, which is the length of one of the sides. Now, whenever you have a right angle triangle, you know you are either going to use trigonometry or Pythagoras. Pythagoras we use when we've got two sides and we're trying to work out a third, and trigonometry we're going to use if we've been given an angle as well. So in this case, I know I'm going to use trigonometry. Now, if you know you're going to use trigonometry, the best thing you could do is just write out SOHCAHTOA, because that just helps serve as a reminder. First thing we do is label our triangle, and it's all going to be in relation to the angle that has been given. So I need to think about what side is going to be opposite. So this is the side that is opposite my given angle. This side is adjacent, which is adjacent just means next to. And this side is the hypotenuse, and I always know where the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. Okay, so the opposite side is the one that's opposite your given angle, and the hypotenuse is always opposite the right angle. So now I've labelled my triangle, I know what each side represents. And which sides am I using? Well, I want to find out x, which is the adjacent, and I've been given the hypotenuse, which is 14.5. So which trigonometric identity deals with A and H? That would be K. So then I write out the formula, cos theta must equal adjacent over hypotenuse. And I've used theta, you might be using x, it doesn't really matter. Theta is just the mathematical expression for writing an angle. So let's substitute what I know. I know that the value of theta is 53. I don't know the adjacent, that's what I'm trying to figure out, that's x. And I know that the value of the hypotenuse is 14.5. So in order to rearrange this equation and get x on its own, I'm going to need to multiply both sides by 14.5. So that would leave me with 14.5 times by cos 53, which I can just plug into my calculator. So 14.5 times by cos 53 equals 8.726317, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we don't need to write everything out because it's telling me to give my answers correct to 3 significant figures. So I count to the third digit, 1, 2, 3, that's over here. I look next door, if it's 5 or more, I'm going to add 1 more. So that's going to be 8.73. Okay, so in this question, I'm told that Ella invests £7,000 for 2 years in an account paying compound interest. Now, compound interest just means that at the end of the year, you gain interest on the total value of everything in your account rather than just the initial investment. So it means each year your money's building and building and building. Now, in the first year, the rate of interest is 3%, and in the second year, the rate of interest is 1.5%. I need to work out the value of Ella's investment at the end of the 2 years. So when I do compound interest, the best thing I can do is turn my percentage into a multiplier. So I start with £7,000, and then that is increased by 3%. So if your original value is 100% and you increase it by 3%, in total, you're trying to work out 103%. And what does percent mean? It means over 100. So I could just type that into my calculator. 103 over 100 is 1.03. So it's really important to get your multipliers right. So the first year, I do 7,000 times by 1.03. And for the second year, there's an interest rate of 1.5%. So once again, I can just think, okay, if I've got 100% and I add on 1.5%, that would become 101.5%. 101.5 over 100 gives me 1.15. Okay, so that's how I'd work that out. So the key thing is thinking about how you turn your interest into a multiplier, and then you just multiply your amounts. So you type them into your calculator. So 7,000 times by 1.03 times by 1.015 gives you £7,318.15. Okay, so in this question, I have been given a quadratic graph. They have drawn it for me. And for the first part of the question, I'm being asked to write down the y-intercept. Now, the y-intercept is literally where the graph crosses or intercepts the y-axis. So we just need to literally find the point where it crosses the y-axis, which is over here. The y-intercept is always going to have an x-coordinate of 0 and the y-coordinate is 4. So if they asked for a coordinate, it would be 0, 4, but they actually just want to know the y-intercept. So we could just say y equals 4. Now for the next part, I'm being asked to write down the coordinates of the turning point of the graph. The turning point is literally where the graph turns, so either the minimum or the maximum point. So over here, this is the coordinate of the turning point. So that's 3 and then -5. And now I'm being asked to use the graph to find estimates for the roots of x squared minus 6x plus 4 equals 0. So what that means is I want to know when this graph, which they've drawn for me, equals 0. Okay, so what I want to do is, where's the line x equals 0? Sorry, y equals 0 is over here. And where does the graph intercept? So whenever you're solving a graph, whenever you're trying to solve equations from a graph, you literally draw the lines and you just think about where's the point that they cross. So an estimate for the root, well, over here the x coordinate, it's really tricky to see on a little screen, so it's 1, 2, 3, so x is 5.3, and what's the other coordinate? It would be, this is 0.5, so it would be about 0.7. And that's how you'd do that question. So in this question, I am told that Chanda buys a necklace for £120 and then sells the necklace for £135. And I need to work out the percentage profit. Now, whenever you're working out percentage change, whether it's an increase or a decrease, you always work out the difference between your original value. So new value, take away the original. So you're working out the difference and you divide that by the original value and times by 100. So the difference, 135, take 120 over 100. I'm just plugging in the numbers from the question. It's going to give me 15 over 120 times by 100. So I can just plug that into a calculator. 15 divided by 120 times by 100 gives me 12.5. So that would be my percentage profit. So in this question, I am given the equations of two straight lines. Oscar says that these lines are parallel. I need to decide if Oscar is correct. Well, the key thing that we need to know is that parallel lines always have the same gradient. Okay, so every line can be written in the form y equals mx plus c, where m represents the gradient. So what I want to do is ensure both of these lines are rearranged in the form y equals mx plus c, so both of them have y as the subject, and then I can compare their gradients. I know that for the first line, the gradient is a half, because the gradient is the coefficient of x. So now I need to find out if the gradient of the second line is also a half. So I've got 6y equals 3x plus 7. I want to make y the subject, so what I'm going to have to do is divide everything by 6, because y is being multiplied by 6. So in order to cancel that out, I need to divide by 6. And whatever I do to one side of the equation, I need to do to each part of the other side of the equation. So 3 divided by 6 would give me 3 over 6 plus 7 over 6. I can simplify 3 over 6 to a half. So I'd be left with, this is the equation of the second line. The gradient, therefore, equals a half. So yes, Oscar is correct. They both have a gradient of 2. Oh, sorry, of a half. So parallel lines have the same gradient. Okay, so in this question, I'm told that Aaliyah bought a car. In the first year after she bought the car, its value depreciated, which means goes down in value or went down in value, at a rate of 23% per annum, and that just means per year if you weren't sure what that meant. And in the second year, the value depreciated at a rate of 19% per year. At the end of the second year, the car was worth £10,914.75, and I need to find out what the value of the car was when Aaliyah bought it. So I don't know what the value is, but whatever the value is, so remember, whenever you don't know the value of something, you can just use a variable, use algebra. So whatever the original value was, multiplied by my original year multiplier, then by my second year multiplier, must give me £10,914.75. Now I've told that in the first year it depreciated at a rate of 23% per annum. So what does that mean when I'm thinking about my multipliers? Well, if I started with 100% and it fell by 23%, that means that I'm actually left with 77%. What does percentage mean? It means over 100. So as a multiplier, that would be 0.77. So that's for the first year. For the second year, it depreciated at a rate of 19%. So again, I do 100 take away 19, which is 81. And 81% means 81 over 100, which would give me a multiplier of 0.81. So now I've got this equation. I know that x times by 0.7 times by 0.81 must give me 10,914. So you could do, well, you could do lots of things, but you could multiply these two terms together first. So you know that x times by 0.77 times 0.81 gives me 0.6237 must equal £10,914.75. To solve the equation, what I need to do is divide both sides by 0.6237, and that will allow me to figure out what x is, which is the original value. So £10,914.75 divided by my answer is 17,500. Okay, so in this question, I have been given a cumulative frequency graph, and I'm being asked to draw a box plot for the distribution of the times taken by the students. So I need to look at what information I've been given. I've been told that the least time taken was 24 seconds and the greatest time taken was 96 seconds. And generally when you're doing a box plot, it's going to look something like this, where the end used to be called a box and whisker diagram, where the whiskers are this, and that would have been the least value and the greatest value. Okay, so the very edges of the box plot are the least and the greatest value. So we can plot these on our diagram. So I know the least value is 24 seconds. If I look at the scale, it's going up in tens for each box of 5. So if a box of 5 is worth 10, I know that each little box must be 2. So 24 would be over here. And 96, that would be 90. So 2, 4, 6 would be the third one over here. So I've plotted my lowest value and my greatest value. Now what I'm going to have to do is work out the lower quartile, the upper quartile, and the median. And the lower quartile is, so if we think about the median as being half of the data, the value of the middle of the data, the lower quartile is the value of the first quarter of the data. So it's like the median of from the least value to the median, so halfway. And the upper quartile is 3/4 of the data. So I know that there are 60 students. So to work out the median, 60 divided by 2 is 30. So I go along my cumulative frequency from 30 up to the graph and then I go down. So that would give me, well, this is going up once again, the boxes of 5 are worth 10, so that would give me 54. So I know that my median value is 54. So I plot that here again. So that's my median. Then my lower quartile is going to be a quarter of 60. So 60 divided by 4 is 15. So I go along from 15 to the graph and then down. So that would be 42. So the lower quartile would be here. And then the upper quartile is 3/4 of the data. So 60 divided by 4 and then times by 3. So that would be 45. So 45, I go across to the graph and then down. And that would be 64. So I've got my values plotted here. Okay, when you've plotted them, you join the lower quartile to the upper quartile like that, and then you connect the rest of the box plot with the line. So from the lowest value to the lower quartile, just a line. Then you've got your mid 50% of the data, and then you join it to the upper quartile. So your data is essentially split into the first 25%, the middle 50%, and then the top 25%. So in this question, I am told that the number of insects in a population at the start of the year n is Pn. So n is the beginning of the year. The number of insects in the population at the start of year n plus 1 is Pn plus 1, where Pn plus 1 equals Kpn. Now, if this is seeming a little bit confusing and you're like, what does any of this mean? Whenever you see anything like this, so if you see something like that, or UN or AN, where instead of, like with indices, you would see the little indices in the top right-hand corner. But if you've got something in the bottom right-hand corner, then you know that you are going to use iteration. Okay, and all iteration means is that we use a formula. So this is the formula given. We use a formula which tells us how to work out the next term. So Pn or UN or whatever it is, in this question we've got Pn, that is the initial value or the current term, depending on how you use it. So we always start with the initial value, and then Pn plus 1, well, if something is n plus 1 just means the next thing. So Pn plus 1 would be the next term. So for instance, if Pn was P4, that would represent the 4th term. So Pn plus 1 would be P5, which is the 5th term. So that's what we need to know, the basics about iteration. And then I've been given this formula, and I'm told that K has a constant value of 1.13. So what I can do is just rewrite this formula as 1.13 times by Pn. So what this formula is reading is saying to work out the next term, I do 1.13 times by the current term. So if you have a value, let's say Pn was 4, to work out Pn plus 1, you just do 1.13 times by 4. And then you'd substitute your answer that you get into the next one to figure out the next term. But let's see how that works. So the rest of the question is saying, find out how many years it takes for the number of insects in the population to double. And you must show how you get your answer. So we don't know what the population is. So what we can do is just pick any value. It doesn't really matter what value it is. It could be 2, it could be 200. Pick whatever you like. So I'm going to say that Pn, my initial population, so the number of insects in the population at the start of the year, is going to be, let's just say 2. Okay, so obviously for it to double, we need to get to a part where it is more than 4. So at the start of the year, So if P0, because it's the start of the year, is 2, I then want to figure out what the population is at the end of year 1, or at the start of year 2, at the end of year 2, at the end of year 3, at the end of year 4, at the end of year 5, at the end of year 6, at the end of year 7, 8, and so forth. So let's see what I do. I know that I've just given a random value. You can give Pn a value of anything you want. So to work out Pn plus 1, what I would need to do is 1.13 times by whatever value I get for Pn, which in this case is 2. And just to make things a little bit clearer, instead of saying Pn plus 1, what I'm going to say is this is P0. So therefore, this is going to be P1 because it's the next term. So I'm just going to do 1.13 times by 2, which gives me, if I type it into my calculator, 1.13 times by 2 is 2.26. Now, when we're using iteration, there is something that you can do in your calculator that just helps you get your answer a lot quicker. But let's just do a few more of these before I show you what you need to do. So to get to P2, what do? You're going to do 1.13 times by your previous answer, which is 2.26. And what does that give you? 2.5538. So then, what can I do to work out P3? I'm going to do 1.13 times by my previous answer. So times by 2.5538, which gives me 2.85794. So I'm just going to write these terms here to clear this up a bit. So 2.5538 equals 2.885794. And all I do is I keep on repeating this. So iteration is just repeating, putting in a new value to get a more accurate or to work out the next term. Okay, so what you want to do to speed things up with a calculator is you get your initial value. So I've chosen the initial value of 2. You could have chosen anything, it doesn't matter. All I'm trying to do is prove how long it takes for the population to double. And with multiplication, it doesn't matter what the number is. If one thing doubles at a certain rate, so will the other. So my initial value is 2. So what you do, you get your calculator and you press 2 equals, okay? Then what you do is you enter your formula. So your formula is 1.13 times by Pn. So in this case, it's going to be 2. So 1.13 times by 2, and then you press equals. And then what you do is with the arrows, you go back, you delete the 2, and you just press answer. And then you press equals. So you delete the 2, you replace it with answer because it's saved your previous answer. And that gives you the next term, 2.5538. And then from then on, it's stored this formula and it knows what you want to do. So you just press equals again, and it automatically calculates the next part for you. So that's 2.88. If I press equals again, that's 3.2609. If I press equals again, that's 3.684, so forth. If I press equals again, that's 4.1. So at the beginning of year 0, I had a population of 2. At the beginning of year 1, I had a population of 2.26, and so forth, and so forth, and so forth. I want to figure out how long it takes for the population to double. Double 2 is 4. So I need to find the first year where the population exceeds 4, which is the 6th year. So I say 6 years. Okay, so if you haven't come across iteration before, this might be a little bit tricky, but just watch through the video again and just try and substitute it by yourself, and then see if you can use the calculator as a shortcut. If that's a bit too confusing, then just keep on repeating the formula. Okay, so in this question, I am being told that A and B are points on a centimetre grid. A is the point with coordinates -7, 6, and B is the point with coordinates 8, -5. So you can just draw a quick sketch of what this must look like. You know that negative x is going to be in this quadrant. So -7, +6, I could just do a rough point here, and that would be A. And then B is the point with coordinates 8, -5, so positive x value, let's say roughly here, negative y value, roughly here. So I can plot that over here. Okay, so that's my coordinate B. And if you just plot what the line should look like, then you automatically know what kind of gradient it's going to have. You know that the gradient is going to be negative, but I don't actually think that matters for this question. But it just helps us visualize it anyway. So we need to work out the length of AB. Well, AB is just a diagonal line. And how can you work out the length of a diagonal line? Where have we come across that before? We've come across that before because the diagonal is the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle. So if we know that, what we can do is we can just create a right-angled triangle here on this grid. Now we know that this coordinate A is -7, +6, and this coordinate is 8, -5. So we can figure out what the height and the base of this right-angled triangle would be. So my x coordinates start from -7 and I go up to 8. So think about what's actually happening. From -7 to 0, there's a distance of 7, and from 0 to 8, there's a distance of 8. So your total x distance over here must be 15. Then we do the same with our y values, and remember every coordinate is x and then y, so your x values were -7 and 8. And then let's think about our y values. So we start at +6 and we go down to -5. So you can just visualize it again. The distance from 6 to 0 is 6, and then from 0 to -5 is 5. 6 plus 5 is 11. Okay, so we've got a right angle triangle and we've got the length of the height and the base. So what would we do if we are using Pythagoras? Well, we just create this right angle triangle. Pythagoras' theorem states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And a and b are always your two shorter sides. So I know this is going to be c. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I substitute the values in. 11 squared plus 15 squared equals c squared. I can work that out. So 121 plus 15 squared is 225 equals c squared. Add them together would give you 346 is c squared. And then to find the value of c, we need to do the square root of 346. So type that into your calculator and it gives you 18.601 blah blah blah, and it says give your answer to 1 decimal place, so I'm going to round that to 18.6. So the best thing you can do when you've got questions with a coordinate is actually just try and visualize it for yourself, draw it out, and then if you're ever trying to work out the length of a line segment, you're going to use Pythagoras. It's a centimetre grid, so you know that the distances are just going to be 1 centimetre between each coordinate, and that's how you can work that out. Okay, so in this question, I am told to, using algebra, prove that 1.062 recurring can be written as 1 and 14/225. Now, the first thing you want to do is just ignore the answer, because some people try and work backwards. You want to start with what you've been given. So using algebra, I'm just going to call my initial value x. So I'm going to say x is 1.062 recurring. Now, the key thing with things like this is that you have got a recurring part to this decimal. So what you want to do is multiply out the decimal so that the recurring part is on its own. So if I multiplied this by 10, what would happen? Well, that would become 10.62 recurring. I've still got the 6 in the after the decimal point, so I'm not only left with the recurring bit. So I then want to multiply it by 10 again. That would give me 106.2 recurring. Okay, so I've achieved my first aim, which is to get the recurring part of the decimal just on its own after the decimal point. The next thing that I want to do is get another value. So if I multiply it by 10 again, that would give me 1062.2 recurring. So now I have two values that have just the recurring part of the decimal after the decimal point. So now I can subtract them because anything minus itself is 0. So if I rewrite this with the largest value at the top, so 1000x is 1062.2 recurring, and 100x is 106.2 recurring. What I can do is then just do a basic subtraction. So 1000 take away 100 is 900x. And then this is why this is so cool, because if I subtract this from this, anything take away itself is 0. So similarly, 0.2 recurring takes 0.2 recurring is going to be 0. So that cancels out. And then I just have to do 1062 take away 6. So either, you've got a calculator. So 1062 take away 106 is 956. Okay, so then you've got yourself an equation. What do you always do in order to solve an equation? You isolate the x variable. So if 900x is 956, to isolate the x variable, I'm going to have to divide by 900 because that would cancel out here. So x would be 956 over 900. Now I need to show that it can be written as this fraction here. So I can start simplifying. I could divide by 2. So 956 divided by 2 is 478, and that would be over 450. I could divide by 2 again. So each time I'm just dividing by 2, I'm just simplifying the fraction. 478 divided by 2 is 239, and 450 divided by 2 is 225. So now I've got the denominator that they want me to have over here, and I've got a mixed number. So 239 over 235. I know that 235 fits into that once, and 239 take away 235 gives me 4. Oh, sorry, I was like, what's going on here? That's 225. So that gives me 14. Sorry, that gives me 1 whole, and I'm left with 14. So that would be 14 over 225. So because it's saying prove, you have to show each step of your working. So getting to this part is good, but then you need to show how you simplify the fraction. And you do that by simplifying it and then turning it into a mixed number. Okay, so in this question, I'm told that Faiza is studying the population of rabbits in a park. She wants to estimate the number of rabbits in the park. So this is an estimating population kind of question, which is also known as capture recapture. Now, on Monday, she catches a random sample of 20 rabbits in the park, marks each rabbit with a tag, and then releases them back into the park. So I know that she catches 20 rabbits out of the total population. So N can represent the total population. Okay. On Tuesday, she catches a random sample of 42 rabbits in the park, and 12 of the rabbits are marked with a tag. So 12 out of 42 rabbits are marked with a tag. Now, when we do questions like this, the idea is that if you grab if you grab a certain amount of the population, let's say 20, you tag them, you then release them, they're going to disperse amongst each other, and then you capture another bunch, and then however many of them have tags is going to be proportional to the amount in the whole population. So what we do is we make the fractions that we've created equivalent. And then what we want to do is just solve them, rearrange them in order to get an estimate for the total population. So 20 over n is equivalent to 12 over 42. This is a calculator question, so I could just say 20 over n equals 12 divided by 42, which is, well, let's just leave it as 2/7 because I don't want to write all of that out. But if it was a decimal, it would make this a little bit easier to show. What I can do, because n is my denominator, I can multiply both sides of the equation by n. So I'd be left with 20 equals 2/7 times by n. So I've got n as on this side and it's no longer a denominator. What can I do next? Well, n is being multiplied by 2/7, or I could have left it as 12 over 42. I just simplified it. So then I'm going to want to divide by 2/7 because I always do the inverse to move anything from one side of the equation to the other. So 20 divided by 2 over 7 is 70. So therefore, n must be 70. So we can let Faisal know that there are roughly 70 rabbits in the park. Okay, so another reasoning question. I'm told that Albie is studying the population of rabbits in a wood. One day he catches 55 rabbits and finds that 40 of these rabbits are marked with a tag. Albie estimates that there are 50 rabbits in the wood. Explain why Albie's estimate cannot be correct. Well, he's caught 55 rabbits. So if there are already 55 rabbits present, how can there only be 50 rabbits in the woods? So your sample size, a way to explain this would be that your sample size, so the amount of rabbits that you catch, can't be greater than the total population. Because does it make sense that there are more you catch more rabbits than actually exist? No. Okay, so in this question, I have been given a region that is bounded by 4 straight lines. So this means that this region satisfies all 4 of these lines. And I want to find the 4 inequalities that define the shaded region. So first of all, what I want to do is work out the equation of my lines. When you've got a vertical and a horizontal line, they're super easy to work out. So this line over here, it crosses the y-axis at 6. So therefore, just think to yourself, what are all of the y-coordinates of this line going to be? Well, this coordinate here, that would be 2, 6. This coordinate here, that would be 6, 6. This coordinate here would be minus 6, 6. So each of these random coordinates that I've picked, the y-coordinate is always 6. So I call this line y equals 6. In general, if a line is horizontal, it's going to be a y equals, and if it's vertical, it's going to be x equals. But if you're ever stuck and you can't remember which way around they are, just plug in, find some random coordinates, and what is always constant? Well, the y coordinate is always constant in this case. So let's do the same for the next line. This one over here. Oh, didn't mean to delete that, but this line over here crosses the x-axis at -3. So I could just write this coordinate as -3, 0. Let's pick another random coordinate. This would be -3, 6. Another random coordinate, that's -3, -4. So hopefully you can see that on this line, every x coordinate is -3. So this is the line x is -3. The next few lines are going to be a little bit trickier because they are not straight. Well, they're not vertical or horizontal. So let's have a look at what I can do. So let's start with this line over here. How do you work out the equation of a line? Every line can be written in this format where y equals mx plus c, where m represents the gradient of the line and c is the y-intercept. So how can you easily work out the y-intercept? It's literally where the line crosses the y-axis. So I can write y equals mx plus 6. That's the first part of my equation. And then what I need to do is work out the gradient of this line. How do I do that? Well, I just work out, so if you may have forgotten, the gradient is the change in the y coordinates over the change in the x coordinates. So my gradient, I form a little triangle and I find the change in the y coordinates. So from 6 to 0, that's a distance of 6. And then from 0 to -2, that's a distance of 2. So my gradient is going to be 3. So I've already substituted my y-intercept, which is 6. Now what I want to do is substitute 3 into the line. So that would be y equals 3x plus 2. So this line here, let's just label it, is y equals 3x plus 2. And then the final line, I'm going to do in a similar way. I am going to look at where it intersects the y-axis. So over here, every line can be written in the form y equals mx plus c. So where does this cross the y-axis? At 1. So I know that c is 1. And the gradient of this line, let's just form a nice triangle where it goes through. Let's just see it better by deleting that. Okay, so it goes through the diagonal of a square. So over here and over here. Now this line is going to have a negative gradient. People always get confused with this. So a simple thing to help you, when you're thinking of gradients, you can think of the hill of gradients, okay? So this is the hill of gradients. If we just imagine that we are walking from left to right, like the way we read, you first have to go up the hill. So if your line looks like this, it's going from this direction, it's going to be a positive gradient. If it looks like this, then it's going to have a negative gradient. You're going down the hill. So that's just a quick way to remember. This is going to be a negative gradient. So let's work out the change in y. Well, this is 3. So from 3 to 0, that's a distance of 3. And this from -4 to 2, that's a distance of 6. So your gradient is going to be negative, and then it's going to be 3 over 6, which you could simplify to -1/2. So the full equation of this line is going to be y equals -1/2x plus 1. Okay, so now I've got all 4 of my lines. Let's just label that one here. And I need to decide how I can make them so that they satisfy the region. So this region here is satisfied by any coordinate that is less than this line here. Now I've deleted it, but this was the line y equals 6. So if the coordinates satisfied are less than this line, then it needs to be y is less than or equal to 6, because it's a solid line. So if you ever have a solid line, you know it's going to be less than or equal to. If you have a dotted line, it's going to be less than or greater than. Okay, so if it's a bold solid line, it can be equal to that point, because this coordinate here also satisfies that region. So that's my first line. Then let's look at the next one. So here's my line, x is -3, and all the coordinates that can be satisfied must be greater than -3, okay, because they're in this region here, which is greater than -3. So because it's a solid line, I once again have to include that it could equal it. So x must be greater than or equal to -3. I then can do my next line, my diagonal. So if I do this line here, I look at the inequalities that are satisfied, and they are all above the line. So that must mean the y values are greater than or equal to. So I'm going to say y is greater than or equal to -1/2x plus 1. Okay, so now let's look at the last line, this line over here. So the shaded region is over here. So let's think about what's happening. This is the line y equals 3x plus 2. So which y coordinates are being satisfied by this region? All of the y coordinates that are larger than this line. So it's going to be y is greater than or equal to 3x plus 2. Okay, so in this question, I'm told that there are two similar solid triangular prisms, A and B. The volume of prism A, so volume of prism A is 58.806 centimeters cubed, and the volume of prism B is 1,587.762 centimeters cubed. Now, the cross section of each prism is a right angled triangle, and I'm told that for prism B, the length of the base of the triangle is 8.1 and the area of the whole triangle is 43.74. So what I can do, what's the formula for the area of a basic triangle? I know that base times height divided by 2 gives me my area. So let's substitute the values I have. 43.74 equals 8.1 times by the height divided by 2. Let's rearrange that. So times both sides by 2. So 43.74 times by 2 gives me 87.48 equals 8.1 times by the height. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 8.1. And that would give me 10.8. So the height of this must be 10.8. Okay, that's going to be important because it's asking me to find the height of the triangle for prism A. So I want to have my point of comparison. So let's look at what's happening. If they are similar solids, then that means that they're going to be increasing by a scale factor. So whenever you've got similar solids, you always have your linear scale factor. So that's to do for lengths. So my linear scale factor would be x. It's multiplied by, I don't know, let's say 4. You have your area scale factor, which is going to be whatever the linear scale factor is squared, because you're dealing with an area. And then you have your volume scale factor, which would be x cubed. So I've been given my volume, so I can work out the volume scale factor. So if I do 1,587.762 divided by 58.806, 1,587.762 divided by 58.806, oh, didn't like that, 1,587.762 divided by 58.806 equals 27. Okay, so I know that the volumes to get from prism A to prism B, I multiply it by 27. So my volume scale factor is 27. So I know, therefore, that x cubed must be 27. So to work out my linear scale factor, which is x, what do I have to do? I'm going to have to cube root both sides. So the cube root of 27 is 3. So therefore, my linear scale factor is 3. Now, I know that to get from shape A to shape B, I'm going to have to multiply by 3. So to do the reverse, I'm going to have to divide by 3. So 10.8 divided by 3 gives me 18/5, which is 3.6. So therefore, H would be 3.6. Okay, so in this question, I'm being given a triangle and I'm being asked to work out the area of the triangle. Now, whenever you've been given a triangle, if you've been given a right angle triangle, you know that you can either use Pythagoras or your standard trigonometry, which is SOHCAHTOA. If, however, you have been given a triangle that does not have a right angle, you're going to have one of three options. You either use the sine rule, the cosine rule, or the area of a triangle. Now, the formula for the area of a triangle is half AB sine C. So this is something that you're going to have to remember. And whenever we're dealing with this kind of trigonometry, so not our basic trigonometry, things for a non-right angle triangle, what we want to do, the first thing is label all of our angles and corresponding sides. So in this case, when you have a big letter, it represents an angle, and a little letter represents a side. And wherever your angle is, the opposite to that is going to be your little letter side. So in this triangle, I want the given angle to be C because that's what I'm going to be using. That's the only angle I've been given. Therefore, this side here is going to be C. And this side here would be A and this would be B. It doesn't matter which one's which because we're just multiplying, so you could have labelled them the other way around. Now, all I need to do is substitute into the formula a half times by A, which is 11.2, times by B, which is 4.3, times by sine 118. And I just plug that into my calculator. So 0.5 times by 11.2 times by 4.3 times by sine 118 gives me 21.26137,804. And I'm told to give my answer correct to three significant figures. So the third significant figure is this over here. So I'm going to look next door. If the number is 5 or more, I round it up, I add one more. So that would be 21.3. Okay, so in this question, I'm being asked to solve a quadratic. Now, every quadratic is written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is the coefficient of x squared. So in this case, a is going to be 6. B is the coefficient of x, so b is going to be 5. And c is just the number that's on its own, so c is going to be -6. Remember that the sign, the positive or the negative, always belongs to the term after it. So don't forget that, because some people just say 6. So now I know my values, 6, 5 and -6. And this is a calculator paper, so I can use the quadratic formula. So minus b plus or minus b squared, take away 4ac over 2a. And all I need to do is plug my values in. So b is 5, so that would be -5 plus or minus 5 squared, take away 4 times by a, which is 6, times by c, which is -6. All divided by 2 times by 6, because a is 6. So let's simplify that a bit. 5 squared is 25, and 4 times 6 is 24. 4 times 6 times by -6 is -144, but I'm subtracting -144, so therefore I'm going to have to add. So that would become -5 plus or minus 125 plus, 25 plus 144, which is 169 over 12, which would give me 13 over 12. So with a quadratic, you always have two solutions. That's why we've got this plus or minus here. So solution A is going to be -5 plus 13 over 12. So -5 plus 13 over 12 gives me 2/3. So first solution is x equals 2/3. Okay, and the next solution would be -5 minus 13 over 12. -5 minus 13 is -18, and -18 divided by 12 is going to give you minus 3 over 2. So my second solution is minus 3 over 2. So obviously this is quadratic. You can solve it by factorising. If you're super confident with that, then absolutely do it that way. But you can also use your quadratic formula. Okay, so in this question, I've been given a cuboid and I've been given a few lengths. So I've been given the length of AD, which is 9 centimetres. I've been given the length of FD, which is 13 centimetres. And I've also been given angle GHF. Okay, so I know that this angle here is 49 degrees. So always start by just filling information that you've been given. I'm being asked to work out the size of the angle FAH. So FAH would be this angle here. And what I can do is form a right angle triangle. So FH is what both my pink triangle and my green triangle have in common. So this is what I'm going to come to at the end, because this is my final triangle. So what do I know about this triangle? Nothing yet. I just know that I need to work out the length of some of the sides in order to be able to figure out the angle. So most likely, well, I don't know yet, so I need to work with what information I've been given. But I know that I'm going to have AF, AH, and FH as my final triangle. So I'll come back to that. Now, let's look at the information that we've been given. So let's start with this. We've got two sides of a right angle triangle. So actually, just really quickly, when you've got a question like this, you know you're going to be using Pythagoras probably and trigonometry. And you're not just going to use trigonometry once, you're probably going to be using it twice. So let's just look at what we can work out. We've got this triangle here. It's a right angle triangle. So 9 centimetres, 13 centimetres. I've been given two sides. If I know two sides of a triangle, I can work out the third side by using Pythagoras, which is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are the two shorter sides, and c is always the side opposite the right angle, which is the longest side and is known as the hypotenuse. So let's think what's going on. If c squared is the hypotenuse, if you've been given the longest side, you want to rearrange your equation in order to find a shorter side. So I'm trying to find this side here. I want to substitute my values in. So C is 13, B is 9, and I'm trying to figure out another shorter side. B and A, it doesn't matter which one's which because they're just both the shorter sides. So 169, take away 81 is x squared. So 88 is x squared. And to find out x, I'm just going to do the square root of 88, which if I type into my calculator, gives me 9.38083152. So I know that this length here is 9.38. Okay, what can I work out next? So I've figured out this length here. What other information was I given? Well, I was told that this angle here is 49 degrees. So I'm going to try and form a right angle triangle on the base of the cuboid. So like this, your right angle is here in the corner. So let's draw out what this triangle would look like. Here's your right angle. And you know that this angle here is 49 degrees. We're going to need to figure out one of the sides. So let's see what information you've been given. You know that AD is 9 centimetres. This is a cuboid. So this length here would also be 9 centimetres. And that therefore this length here would also be 9 centimetres. So we have an angle, we have a side, and we're trying to figure out a third side. So we're going to use trigonometry. So I just write out SOHCAHTOA, just to remind me, because it's just so much going on in exam questions. Just do it, it's helpful. So whenever I've got trigonometry, I label each side according to the angle I've been given. So 49 degrees is my given angle. So this is going to be the opposite side. This is going to be the adjacent side. And the hypotenuse is always the side opposite the right angle. So what am I trying to work out? Well, for my final triangle, this one here, I know that I'm going to need the value of FH. So I'm going to want to work out the value of the hypotenuse. And I've been given the value of the adjacent. So if you've got the adjacent and the hypotenuse, you know you're going to use CA. So you write out the formula. Cos theta is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. Substitute in your values. So theta is just the mathematical symbol for any angle. So the angle is 49. The adjacent is 9. And the hypotenuse, I'm just going to call x. Rearrange your equation. So multiply both sides by x. So x cos 49 is 9. And then solve to get x. So I'm going to divide both sides by cos 49. So x is going to equal 9 over cos 49. And I just need to plug that into my calculator. So 9 over cos 49 gives me 13.718277 and so forth. So I know that the length of FH, this side here, is 13.718. So here. Okay, so what have I found out? Well, I found out FH. I know AF is 9.38. So I now have two sides and I can use trigonometry. So let's do it again for my final triangle. So you've used the two initial triangles that you've been given in the question, and then you think to yourself, okay, where's my final triangle? So I want FAH over here. So I've got a right angle here. I know that this length is 9.38. I know that this length is 13.718. And what am I trying to figure out? I'm trying to figure out this angle here. So once again, label your triangle in relation to your angle. So this is going to be your opposite because it's opposite the given angle. This side is adjacent because it's next to the given angle. And this is your hypotenuse. Now you've been given the opposite and the adjacent. So once again, write out your SOHCAHTOA and which uses the adjacent and the opposite. So O and A, that would be TOA. So write out the formula. Tan theta equals opposite over adjacent. Substitute in your values. Opposite is 13.718 over 9.38. And how do you figure out theta? You're going to have to divide by tan. So that's where you press shift tan so that you're doing the inverse of tan and then your fraction. So 13.718 over 9.38. So shift tan and then you've got a fraction 13.718 over 9.38. Close the brackets, gives you an angle of 55.636728. You might have slightly different values because you might not have rounded. And it says give your answer correct to the nearest degree. So the nearest degree, this is your degree. Look next door, it's more than 5, so it's going to round to 56. Okay, so in this question, I am being shown a graph which shows the volume of water in a container. And I'm being asked to calculate an estimate for the gradient of the graph when t is 17.5. So whenever you are estimating a gradient, and the reason you would do this is because you don't have a straight line, you have a graph that has a curve. Whenever you are estimating a gradient, what you want to do is use a tangent to the curve. So the first thing you do is you go to 17.5. So that's this point over here, okay? And you draw a straight line. A tangent is just a straight line that touches the curve at one point. You draw a straight line. It's so hard to do it on here. So you draw a straight line and you're going to calculate the gradient of that. So now that we've got a straight line, we can calculate the gradient like we normally did. So how do you work out gradient? The gradient is the change in the y coordinates over the change in the x coordinates. So let's draw myself a little triangle, and you're always trying to look for a part where the line goes exactly through a diagonal. This isn't amazing because my line is so thick, so it covers the line, but we do what we can. So I'm going to just get rid of that line actually to see where it would touch. So if I've drawn the straight line, oops, didn't mean to do that. So if I've drawn that straight line like that, then it would probably be touching about here. Okay, so if I've got a straight line, why is this so difficult? You have got a ruler and a piece of paper, so yours is going to be a lot better. But I'm just showing you the method. My answer might be slightly out of range. So just work out the gradient of your line. So if that was the top of the line, let's first figure out what the scale is. So that's 12.5. So each little square must be 0.5 because the distance between 12.5 and 10 is 2.5, and 2.5 divided by 5 is 0.5. So that must mean that this would be 12.5, 13, 13.5. This coordinate here is 10. So the distance for my y is going to be 3.5. And then let's look at the distance for my x values. So my x value is 20. And then over here, that value would be, well, this would be 17.5. So that value would be 17. Okay, so the distance of my x values is 3. So then the gradient is going to be 3.5 divided by 3, which gives me 1.16. And that is in range, luckily. Yours is going to be a lot more accurate as long as you've drawn a tangent. Okay, so the key thing is that you must draw a tangent to the curve and try and make it as nice and straight as possible. Use a thin pencil so that it doesn't cover up the squares like mine does. And then you just work out the gradient of this line. Okay, and any answer in the range of 0.9 to 1.2 will be absolutely fine. Okay, so here I'm now being asked to describe fully what the gradient in part A represents. I've just drawn a little sketch of the graph. So gradient in general represents the rate of change. So put into the context of this graph, the gradient of this graph represents the rate of change of the volume. Okay, so essentially how much water is being added at what rate into the container. So gradient is generally representative of the rate of change, and then you just put it into context of the question. Okay, so in this question we have been given an inverse function and a composite function. So let's see what we can do. We know that h of x equals fg of x, okay? And then I'm being asked to find the inverse of h of x. So step one, what I want to do is figure out what fg of x means or is. So when you're dealing with functions or composite functions in particular, the way you deal with them is you work out what the function of g of x is, and then you substitute that into f of x. So I know that g of x is 2x plus 3. I haven't been given any value, so I'm just going to have to substitute that whole thing into f of x. So f of x is the cubed root of x. So wherever I see an x, I'm going to substitute all of g of x into it. So fg of x is going to be the cubed root of 2x plus 3. Okay, so I know that therefore h of x must also equal the cubed root of 2x plus 3 because I know that they are equal. So h of x is this, and to work out the inverse of x, or the inverse of h of x, what I need to do is, there are two ways you can do this. I'm just going to show you one way that might be helpful. If it's not, then you just do the other way, which is absolutely fine. So let's just actually think about what's happening, because this is functions after all. So if h of x is the cubed root of 2x plus 3, and I wish to do a function machine, and I start with x, what's the order of operations, or like how are things happening? So what's the first thing that happens to x? It's being multiplied by 2, and then I'm adding 3 to it, and then I am cube rooting it, and that gives me my output. Okay, so to find the inverse, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to cube it. I'm then going to have to subtract 3, and then I'm going to have to divide by 2. And that's going to give me the inverse. So the way I tend to do this, or the way that you can do this, is you start by labeling y equals the cubed root of 2x plus 3. Okay, so you just make h of x equal to y. You then rearrange it so that you make x the subject. So what's the first thing I'm going to do? Well, this is why the function machine might help you a little bit. You know that you're going to cube both sides. So cube both sides. So y cubed is 2x plus 3. What are you going to do next? You're going to subtract 3. So y cubed, take 3, equals 2x. And then what are you going to do? You're going to have to divide by 2. So y cubed, take 3 over 2 equals x. Now, when we do this, we flip the signs. So we flip x and y. So we'd say y equals x cubed minus 3 over 2. And the final part is you just replace y with h minus 1. So your final answer would be this. Okay, so in this question, I'm dealing with bounds. Now, I've been told that a race is measured to have a distance of 10.6 kilometers, correct to the nearest 0.1 kilometers. And that Sam runs the race in a time of 31 minutes 48 seconds, correct to the nearest second. So what I want to do first of all is calculate my upper and lower bound. So I know that the race is 10.6 kilometers when it's been rounded to the nearest 0.1 kilometers. So what does that mean? Well, 0.1 kilometers means it's one decimal place that I've rounded to. So let's think about what the 0.1 kilometers surrounding 10.6 would be, or what the decimal places surrounding that would be. So that would be 10.7 or 10.5. Now, to work out your upper bound, you're going to work out the maximum possible value it could be before it would have rounded up to 10.7. And for the lower bound, it's the maximum possible value, or the minimum possible value it could be before it's rounded down to 10.5. So we'd say that this would be 10.65 and 10.55. And a lot of people get confused by this because obviously if it was 10.65 to one decimal place, it would round to 10.7. But technically it would be 10.649 recurring. That's a little bit complicated to use. So for GCSE for bounds, we just say it's 10.65 as the upper bound. And generally, if it would be an error interval, we would say it like this. So we know not to actually include 10.65, but we use it as our bound. So if I write my bounds up here, I know that for the distance, the upper bound is going to be 10.65 kilometers and the lower bound is going to be 10.55 kilometers. Now I want to do the same thing for time. So I know that Sam runs the race in 31 minutes 48 seconds. So let's just round the 48 seconds bit and then we'll add it onto the minutes. So 48 seconds, what are the seconds surrounding that? That would be 49. and 47. So what would the maximum upper bound be? That would be 48.5, and 47.5 would be my lower bound. So in terms of time, the upper bound is going to be 31 minutes and 48.5 seconds, and the lower bound is going to be 31 minutes and 47.5 seconds. Now, generally when we're working with time, we want to write it as in terms of an hour, because speed is generally calculated in kilometers or miles per hour. So what we're going to need to do is convert my time into hours. So let's think about how we can do this. Well, first of all, I'm going to need to convert 9 minutes and seconds into a constant unit. So I could convert the minutes into seconds. So 31, remember, I'm sure you know this, but just for reference, 1 minute is 60 seconds. So 31 times by 60 is 1,860. And then if I add 48.5 to it, that gives me 1,908.5. So my upper bound is actually 1,908.5 seconds. And let's do the same for my lower bound, which is 47.5 seconds. So 31 times by 60 plus 47.5 gives me 1,907.5 seconds. This still isn't in terms of an hour. So how do I convert seconds to hours? So this is quite simple stuff, but people just get confused on this so frequently. So I'm just going to explain. So there are 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. So therefore, to go from seconds to a minute, we're going to divide by 60. And to go from minutes to an hour, we divide by 60 again. So in total, I'm going to be dividing by 3,600. And that is because 1 hour is made up of 3,600 seconds. Okay, so let's calculate the new lower bound in terms of hours. I'm going to do 1,908.5 divided by 3,600. And 1,907.5 divided by 3,600. So 3,600, my lower bound would be 0.52986111, and my upper bound would be 1,908.5 divided by 3,600 gives me 0.5301388889. Okay, so what I want to do now is actually calculate what the speed must be. So if you're not 100% confident with bounds, then the best thing to do would just be to calculate all the possibilities. So all of the possibilities would be the upper bound of distance divided by the upper bound of time, the upper bound of distance divided by the lower bound of time, the lower bound of distance divided by the upper bound of time, and the lower bound of distance divided by the lower bound of time. So let's just plug those values in. That would be 10.65 and then 10.55. I'm just writing out the distance first. Over the upper bound is 0.53. The lower bound is 0.529, the upper bound is 0.53, and the lower bound is 0.529. So now I know the calculations that I need to do, and I'm going to get 4 values, which I'll write here. So this is my first calculation, second calculation, third, and fourth. So 10.65 divided by 0.5301388 is 20.089 0.07553. Do the same thing again. So 10.65 divided by 0.5298611 is 20.0996066. Then I do 10.55 divided by 0.530138 gives me 19.9004, and then 10.55 divided by 0.5298611 gives me 19.91087.815. So now you've got all four possibilities, and you need to calculate the value of V to a suitable degree of accuracy. So what value would satisfy all four of these options? Well, if I think about rounding to, so 20.089, and then let's just pick 19.91. What would a suitable degree of accuracy be to ensure that both of my values, well, all four, round to the same thing? In this case, we would probably round to two significant figures, because if you rounded to one decimal place, what would that be? That would be 20.1, and this would be 19.9. So the figures don't match. So if I rounded to the nearest ones, so to two significant figures, this would round to 20, so would this. This would round to 20, this would round to 20, this would round to 20, this would round to 20. Okay, so by considering bounds, I would say V equals 20. Okay, so you made it to the final question, and this is a really good one. So we're dealing with an equation of a circle here. So it's useful just to recap that the equation of any circle can be written as x squared plus y squared equals r squared. This is if the circle has a centre of 0, 0, which in GCSE it will. So r represents the radius. Okay, so I know that 12.125 must equal r squared. So the first step I can take is just calculate what the radius must be, which is going to be the square root of 12.1225, which is 3.5. So I know that the radius of this circle is 3.5. Now, what else have I been given? I know that the point P lies on the circle. I know that my circle is going to have a centre of 0, 0 because it's GCSE. So if the radius is 3.5, I can start by just filling in where some of my coordinates would be. On a horizontal line, I know that would be 3.5, that would be negative 3.5. Over here, that would be 3.5. And this would be negative 3.5. So you can just sketch the circle like that, just have a rough idea of what's going on. Now, I'm told that the coordinates of P are 2.1, 2.8. So 2.1, 2.8 would be roughly here. Remember, this is just a sketch just so that I can help visualize. And I'm told that the line L is a tangent to the circle at point P. So line L is a tangent over here, and I need to find an equation of L. Okay, so what can I do here? Well, what values do I know? So I know that this here is the radius, okay, because the radius is from the center of the circle to any point on the outside. And what I can do is work out what the gradient of the radius must be, because the radius is just this part here, but that line can continue on until forever. So let's just work out the gradient of that line. If I know that P is the point 2.1, 2.8, I know that my y value is 2.8. So for the gradient, the change in y from 2.8 to 0 is 2.8. And the change in x is going to be, well, my x coordinate is 2.1. So from 2.1 to 0 is 2.1. So the gradient of the radius is going to be 2.8 divided by 2.1, which is 4/3. Okay, so generally with an equation of a circle question, the first thing you want to do is calculate the gradient of the radius. You do that by just plotting, just visualize where the graph is, and you can work out the gradient because you know that you have a starting point of 0 for x and y. So gradient of the radius is 4/3. Now I know that the tangent and a radius meet at 90 degrees, which means that they are perpendicular. And this is from circle theorems. Okay, so a tangent and a radius always meet at 90 degrees. And if lines are perpendicular, then they have a gradient that multiplies to make -1. So perpendicular lines have gradients that multiply to make -1. So essentially, when you've got lines that are perpendicular, the gradient of the other line is going to be the negative reciprocal of your original. So let's just get rid of some of things here. I know that the gradient of radius is 4/3. And I know that perpendicular lines have gradients that multiply to make -1, or whose gradients are negative reciprocals of one another. Now a reciprocal, in case you forgot, is just the fraction flipped over. So the negative reciprocal is going to be the negative fraction flipped over. So the gradient of the tangent must be -3/4. Okay, so how do I write any equation of any straight line? Tangent is a straight line. I write it in the form y equals mx plus c. So what do I know? I know m, which is the gradient. So I can substitute that in. That's going to be -3/4. So y must equal -3/4 x plus c. And I need to then work out the y-intercept. So I know that the tangent crosses at these coordinates, so I can substitute these values in. So when x is 2.1, y is 2.8. So let's just write that into my equation. 2.8 equals -3/4 times by 2.1 plus c. So 0.75 times by 2.1 is 1.575. So -3/4 times 2.1 is going to be -1.375. So to figure out what c is, I'm just going to add 1.575 to both sides of the equation, which would give me 4.375. Okay, so the gradient is -1/4. The y-intercept is 4.375. Okay, so now that I know my gradient and my y-intercept, I can write the full equation. So that would be y equals -3/4 x plus 4.375. Now, if you've got this far, that's amazing. The next part is just rearranging the equation in the form that they want you to. So it's saying give your answer in the form ax plus by equals c, where a, b, and c are integers. Remember, integer just means a whole number. So obviously we are going to need to turn this decimal into a whole number. So 4.375, if you just type it into your calculator, it will convert it to a fraction. So -3/4 x plus 35/8. So how can I turn this into a whole number? Well, I can multiply by 8. So I can just multiply everything by 8. So I'd be left with 8y equals, and minus 0.75 times by 8 is going to give me minus 6 plus 35. So by multiplying by 8, I've actually got rid of both denominators. And then what's the last thing I need to do? Well, I want both x and y to be on the same side, and I want x to come first. So that would be, you add 6x to both sides. So you've got 6x plus 8y equals 35. And that is all you do, where A is 6, B is 8, and C is 35. But you don't need to actually write that. I'm just showing you that that's what you've done. So your final answer would be 6x plus 8y equals 35. But if you manage to get to here, then you basically got almost full marks. You just need to do the next part, which is rearranging it in the form that they want you to.